Hi, it's Darren at Chenard's. We're talking a little bit today about the summer garden and the transitions that happen in the garden. We're here in early July, and we're seeing the beginnings of the changeover in the season. We've just harvested out our onions. We have lettuce that is on its last bit of growth. We're going to try to harvest that out and salvage it and do some additional planting behind it. The peas, by July, are also pretty well done, so they're going to need to come out. This will give us lots of available soil space to do some follow-up plantings for additional summer crops and to start planting crops for the fall and winter garden. Even though we had a crop growing earlier in the season in this location and we improved the soil with soil amendments and we fertilized well, we need to refresh this soil before we plant a new crop behind it. We'll need to make our planting hole, work in some fresh compost, add some fertilizer, and plant our new plants. So we're planting some cauliflower here for the fall and winter garden. This variety, Amazing, planted now in early July, should be ready for harvest maybe mid to late September if everything goes well. Now, it's very important, more so even now than at other times of the year, to mulch your new plantings to conserve moisture in. We're going to be 100 degrees here in a couple of days, and we want to make sure these plants don't overstress. Now, one of the reasons the lettuce fades out is simply because of age, but lettuce also doesn't really like the heat of the hottest parts of summer. So we want to get a follow-up crop because I hate being out of lettuce when all my tomatoes are just coming on, but we're going to try to give that crop a little bit of protection from the worst of the heat so it doesn't just bolt out while it's very young. Having large plants nearby on the south of the planting you're putting in will provide some shade and protection from the worst heat during the summer growing. It's important when you're doing this to also take into account available space as your new plantings mature and your older plantings get bigger and bigger. So we've got about 1.5 feet, almost 2 feet from my new lettuce plant to my tomato to the south of it, and it looks like it's a really tight space in here. But this spinach is only going to be in for maybe 2 to 3 more weeks before it bolts out. And these potatoes will be harvested in 3 to 4. As that lettuce develops, we'll have plenty of space around it for it to grow in. This kind of thinking about size and turnover is very important for maintaining a continuous gardening practice. So it's still in the mid part of summer. A lot of crops will be creating some space for new crops to go in. The peas are finishing, lettuce we pointed out. Spinach won't be too far behind, it doesn't last long in the heat. Garlic is also finishing up this time of year and will provide another amount of space to plant into. In my garden here, I'm not going to be replanting this section though. We have a dry garden, wet garden situation, and my unirrigated garden over here will not grow new starts planted this late into the year. There's just not enough available soil moisture. So for a good, high-yielding and successful vegetable garden, nutrition is very important. We fed all of our plantings when we put them in the ground. April, May is typical time frame for the main part of the garden into maybe early June. Now we're here in the early part of July, basically 5 or 6 weeks after planting, and a lot of that fertilizer we put in at planting has run its course and is running out. So it's very important we keep adequate nutrition in the plants to make sure they finish their yield. A good organic granular fertilizer works well for about 6 weeks. It does require soil contact and soil microbial activity before the plants can use it. So we can't just dust it on the soil surface. we need to actually have some incorporation of the fertilizer lightly into the soil underneath it. Fertilizer needs to be applied roughly evenly around the perimeter of the plant to ensure good even feeding for the entire plant. Tomatoes, of course, are famous for their hungriness, and we're going to fertilize our tomato here. We're going to distribute some organic fertilizer around the perimeter of the plant. And we're going to take our hand and just lightly incorporate that into the soil surface. Broccoli is also quite famous for its nutrient demand. We're going to give it a good feeding as well. Always read your fertilizer label to know how much to apply and to understand what nutrients are in the fertilizer you're using and what its expected release pattern is. Now, the potatoes behind us are looking good, and we could feed them, but if we look at the stage of development and know the variety we planted, we're expecting to harvest these potatoes in about 2 to 3 weeks. Putting another load of fertilizer on them right now really isn't going to get us much benefit, so we're going to bypass them. So pretty much all crops that have been in the ground for more than 4 weeks and are expecting at least another 4 weeks to harvest should be fertilized. Not all require lime, but a good proportion of plants benefit from the calcium in lime. Tomatoes, peppers, melons, cucumbers, and squashes are the primary plants that benefit from lime. Applying a granular lime is just like applying a granular fertilizer. We want to distribute it fairly evenly around the plant and lightly incorporate it into the soil surface so it stays where it needs to be and works down into the soil so the plant roots can absorb it. A good-sized tomato plant, if you limed well at planting, should get a good dose of lime, a good handful, a quarter to a third of a cup, again, in the early summer in Western Oregon. Same thing with zucchinis and other summer squashes that are very, very high calcium demand plants. Plants like peppers and cucumbers, while they benefit from the additional calcium, are not usually as critical about it in terms of the volume used, so you can go a little lighter with them. If you're also mulching at this time for water conservation or for weed suppression, get your fertilizers and limes in first and then mulch around the plants after those are down. Water in and the fertilizer will take effect right away.